Are you looking for adventure? Do you want to find peace? Long-distance trails offer you freedom and discovery. They offer a way to connect to yourself and to the world around you at the same time. The most popular trails have become crowded, but there are so many other trails that have plenty of space. The Trails Around the World podcast is here to introduce you to new trails and to new types of trails and to expand your horizons. Join me as we explore, finding out what is possible and how to do it. Christine, welcome back to the Trails Around the World podcast.
I'm very glad you're having me again, and I think for the fifth time.
This is the fifth episode we've done together, yes. This is episode number 24, which makes you over 20% of the total. And actually, one of the episodes was 2, so you're actually 6 of those 24. So you are 25% of the podcast episodes. For those who have not listened to any of the previous interviews we've done, could you, we've gone over your name. Could you go over, tell us a little bit about your background and what you've done in the adventuring world?
Well, I can see you try to get around pronouncing my name. My name is Christine Thuermer, Thuermer. And as you might have guessed from the name, I'm a German long-distance hiker. I started hiking in 2004 with the PCT, and I basically never stopped ever after. So now, as we talk today, I have hiked about 62,000 kilometers. So that's about 40,000 miles. In 40 countries. I spent more than 2,000 nights outside in my tent. I've used up more than 50 pairs of trail running shoes, and I've been eating half a ton of chocolate. So that's about all the numbers you need to know. And today we want to talk about my latest adventure, because for the very first time on my hiking career, I have been to Japan. So I've been to Japan before for cycling. I cycled 3 months across the whole country in 2009. And ever since, I wanted to come back. And now is the perfect time to go to Japan because the yen, the Japanese currency, is at a sort of historic low. So me being a year-round traveler hiker and very economy-minded, decided this is the perfect time because now it's very cheap, and this is why I wanted to go this year. So, and I also wanted to thank Chris because I asked him for advice on to going to Japan. He gave me advice, but unfortunately, I only heeded half of it, which I have regretted thoroughly because Chris was so right. So next time I listen to you. Chris said, basically, if you go to Japan, don't go before mid-September. I wanted to go actually the whole summer. Chris was able to talk me out of that at least, but I flew to Japan end of August. Still too early, so you were absolutely right, Chris. It is not a good idea to hike in Japan before mid-September.
It depends where you want to hike, of course. But you were looking at hiking at the sort of 1,000 elevation level, 1,000 meters and below, so 3,000 feet and below, and that is not the optimum time for doing that. That is best done in the shoulder seasons, sort of September to even early December. Although camping is no fun at that point. And probably the prime season is October, November, and March to May. But past mid-May, it starts getting, well, you'll describe what happens as we go.
So maybe we start because the idea was, okay, so I heeded at least half of your advice because if I had done what I had planned doing starting in June, I basically would never ever go back to Asia. So, but what was the plan? I wanted to hike 2 trails. First, the Tokai Shizen Hodo, which you have also recorded actually 2 episodes about. So I was sort of like intrigued. It sounded so nice. And so my idea was to first hike Tokashisen Hodo. And in the time remaining, I wanted to do the Michinoku Coastal Trail. So this was the plan. The plan completely failed. So let me just only briefly touch on the Tokashisen Hodo and give out a warning to everybody who listened to this episode. Because this episode was recorded with Amy and Jim. Yes. And they recommended it very highly. They said easy hiking, wonderful, fantastic, everything nice. So I was sort of lured into that. But Amy and Jim hiked the trail about 5 years ago.
6. Yeah, 5. Yeah, 2008. I think it was spring 2018.
Exactly. And now when I arrived there, this is 6 years later. This is 2 Corona years later and several typhoons later. So what happened is there were 3 factors I will now describe that led to really something completely new, something I've never, ever done before. I completely bailed. Mm-hmm. I've never done it before. I just said, okay, I can't do this. And I left the Tokashisen Hodo. And this is a warning for everybody who plans on doing it. Right now, parts of this trail are basically impassable. What has happened is that first of all, in the Corona years, nobody did any trail maintenance. Especially not in these areas where you walk through cedar plantations, which are privately owned. So the landowners, it's not the landowner's prime idea to clear trail. So they have other problems. So basically you have like so many blowdowns. The trail is gone. It was a nightmare. Plus, there have been so many typhoons. The last typhoon just weeks before I started on the Tokashisen Hodo, and the erosion was atrocious. So just basically, really, the whole trail was gone. Steep slopes and everything had been washed down, and there was no trail. And I remember the time, there were 2 incidents that really made me go. I mean, it was too hard. There were several other things I will talk about later. But the time there were 2 incidents which made me decide, okay, I'm quitting. The first one is like a really short, like something like 4 or 5 kilometers through the forest. I could have skipped it. I could have taken the bus. But I said, oh, nice trail, nature trail, I do it. And it started with trail completely washed out. And stupidly enough, I didn't turn around. I made my way through. And all of a sudden, I end up in some sort of like tree mikado. There was just blowdowns everywhere. Trail was gone, blowdowns. And I ended up really like crawling over tree stumps, over fallen down trees. And I was just like, oh, what happens if I fall? Because trail was gone. And the worst moment was like I was clinging to one like tree which had fallen, and I tried to get over. I could still touch the ground somehow, and I tried to maneuver over. And all of a sudden, the ground crumbled, and I was just hanging on this damn tree with my backpack. And I said, this is. I mean, if I had fallen, I wouldn't have died, but I would have really injured myself. And when I sort of escaped this tree tangle, I was shaking. I had lost my water bottle. I had lost my bandana. And I thought, this is no fun. Mm-hmm. And I decided, okay, if there is another incident like that, I will quit. And just 3 days later, what happened is all of a sudden there were ribbons across the trail. But no sign, no nothing. I didn't know what to do. So I just decided to take a look. I advanced, and really, I've never seen anything like that. The trail was supposed to traverse a steep slope, and the slope was just gone. The entire slope was just gone. And I looked at it, there was no way I could go across, and there were cracks in the ground. Because, like, of course, if there's a whole slope gone, it affects the surrounding area. And I really ran because, okay, if I cause another erosion or whatever, I'm gone with the rest of the slope. So I just ran back and decided this is it. I'm quitting. And to really make sure that I really, really quit, even the detour, I found a way to detour around and get to the next train station. It was an old road. So I walked this old road and the whole road was gone too, because another steep slope had just fallen down, buried the whole road. I still tried to climb over it, but I said, hell, what are you doing here? This is just suicidal, because this is new. This erosion, and if the whole earth starts moving again, you are gone with it. And so this was the point where I said, okay, I'm leaving Tokai Shizenhodo, and I switched to the Michinoku Coastal Trail, which is the main topic we want to talk today about. Yeah. So my advice for everyone who wants to Tokai Shizenhodo, right now, the eastern end, the end towards Tokyo, is just not passable. It's too dangerous, especially for one person, with no satellite messenger, with no emergency beacon, no way to get help. Just don't do it.
Okay, several things to say to that. First of all, I think you're exactly right about the time frame when this situation deteriorated. And I was living in Yokohama, so in eastern Japan, just south of Tokyo, from 2019 to 2020. And there was a 100-year storm. I believe it was October of 2019. This is before the pandemic. And it affected eastern Japan. Okay. At least thousands, I think tens of thousands of people lost their homes. I was in a very solid building, but on a steep slope. And in the middle of the storm, there was an earthquake. And I was completely terrified. So Japan has the highest incidence of natural disasters in the world. And at the risk of scaring people off further, years ago, this is maybe 15 years ago, I had been up in the high Alps and at 3,000 meters up above Hakuba, where the Winter Olympics were back in the 1990s. And I was near the highest point, and I stood on a promontory, a high point, and we took photos and went home. And maybe a week later or 3 days later, it was very soon afterwards, there was an earthquake, and that geographic feature disappeared with several people on it who also ceased to exist. And especially in Japan, don't stand out on cliff edges, right? You never know when there's going to be an earthquake. The mountains are geologically very young. Japan, I believe, has certainly of prime hiking areas, has the steepest mountains in the world. And, I'm back in New England now, and the comparison is just dramatic. I went for a hike with my son on the nearby high point for the area around here, and he spent some time going to a Japanese public school, and we realized that the daily walk he was expected to make to the Japanese school had the same elevation change as this hike that was the biggest one in the area we live in. Japanese kids do it in a rush, in school uniform, every day, and much steeper. So, Japan is just a different thing than many North Americans or Europeans have experienced before.
Yes, this is before we switch to the Michinoku Coastal Trail, this is also what I want to give as like a general idea. As I said, I've hiked 60,000 kilometers. There's very few people who've hiked more than me. And still, it really, Japan humbled me because I misjudged. I made 3 major mistakes that led to really almost disaster in the beginning.
Yeah, I
And that,
wanted to go over this. You did a wonderful summary of 3 points to go over on your social media. So please go ahead. This is a valuable thing right here.
exactly. So the first one, which is like the least important, is food. So keep in mind, like as a long distance hiker, you need lots of calories. So the normal thru-hiker diet consists of lots of chocolate, peanut butter, stuff like that, sugary stuff, lots of chocolate, as I mentioned, and nuts maybe, plus lots of pasta and granola. So this is what I've been eating more or less everywhere, with varying quality, but everywhere. Problem is, you can't get neither of these three staples in Japan, or at least you can't get them easily. So let's start with granola. I'm not a big fan of granola, but it's just very handy. It's easy to prepare, lots of calories, lots of fiber. You can only get granola in Japan in bigger supermarkets, and it will be outrageously expensive. Like not only double, but more or less triple the price you pay like in the US. So
Or quadruple. Yeah.
yeah, so it's just not very feasible. So this was the first problem. Second problem is like all these dehydrated dishes, like in the US, like you have these Nor, or formerly known as Lipton side dishes, which is basically pasta with something. No way you can get something similar in Japan. What you will be able to get is a ramen noodle soup in all variations, actually quite good variations. But ramen noodle soup alone doesn't fill you up as much as like really solid pasta. And also after a while, all this ramen noodle soup gets out of your ears. It's always the same. It's more or less variations, but it's not very filling. And it's always the same. So this was the next problem. The biggest problem for me, depending so much on sugar, I know it's not very healthy, but for hikers, you need all the sugar. There's no chocolate, or at least there is chocolate, but whereas your standard chocolate in Europe is 100 gram, in Japan the only chocolate you get is 50 gram, half of it, which I basically inhale. This is like one bite, but it's the same price. So chocolate is extremely pricey, and only in small quantities. You might be able only in some shops to get your Snickers or Mars bar or whatever, but they will be very expensive and they are not widely available. So actually, I was so undersugared. I just, if you come like from your normal stable, you're working out, you use so much energy, but there's no sugar. It was a big problem for me. I just couldn't get enough calories. On the good part is you go through all these convenience stores or supermarkets. They have fantastic sushi, bento boxes. So you get fantastic food, but the food is not, it's fresh. You have to eat it the same day. There's hardly anything you can carry when you're hiking. So it took me quite a while to figure out what to eat. And basically, because I changed my whole strategy of hiking, I spent more time in civilization. In the end, it worked. But in the beginning, this was tough. And Tokai Shizen-Hodo, in comparison to Michinoku Coastal Trail, which is very close to civilization, on the Tokai Shizen-Hodo, you have various days without touching or without passing by a convenience store. So I needed food that keeps for a longer time, but it was difficult to find. So keep that in mind, that you really have to get used to it, find what you like. It is possible to thru-hike. You find stuff that works, but it is difficult. It took me quite a while. So this was the first factor.
In Japan, I mean, the diet is based on rice. And so, yes. You have to understand a couple of things. Rice, first of all, a lot of the food out of the convenience stores, and yes, your convenience stores have a lot of preservatives in the food, which is basically bad, but in this context is not the worst thing possible. As the earlier interview on the Tokai Shizen-Hodo, we discussed how what they said was, if a group of hikers got together to try to design the perfect store to put along a thru hike, they would probably come up with the konbini. Kombini is Japanese for convenience store. And I thought that was a wonderful statement, but you need to know the foods, and you also need to know how the Japanese think in terms of hiking food. So, for instance, with rice, if it has plum in it, the plum is used as a preservative. Okay, so if you're buying a rice ball, then if you buy it with plum in it, it will last longer. You can carry that for a day and a half, 2 days. Obviously, if you get tuna fish and mayonnaise in it, I wouldn't carry that for very many hours. So you do learn over time, but when you're just flying in and starting to hike there, you don't know these things. So you can't know which food to choose to go a little bit further. And of course,
exactly.
Yeah. And the onigiri, the rice balls, are, eating plum rice balls all the time would get pretty tiresome, and the calories are limited. One needs fat and protein to really get the calories one needs, and that's not always there.
Exactly.
And the foods that you mentioned have fat and protein, and there's a reason. Those are weight efficient. So exactly. I rely on nuts a lot, but I have sources to get nuts, and you can't resupply on the trail that easily.
Well, you have nuts, but they are outrageously expensive. Even peanuts, which cost hardly anything, it's very cheapest thing, is outrageously expensive.
Very small packages, yes.
Exactly. So this was the first factor that sort of like I was completely undersugared. I didn't have enough calories, which sort of impaired my mental abilities as well. Plus, and now we come to the second factor, which is more important, which is the climate. And I really totally underestimated it because I just looked at the temperature. I've hiked through so many desert areas. I've hiked Arizona Trail, Florida Trail, Chile, God knows where. So I'm really used to hiking in heat. But the temperature is not the problem. In Japan, the humidity is the problem. The high temperatures in combination with an incredible high humidity it just kills you. It really kills you. Combine this with very steep terrain. When I had to walk uphill, I had to make a break every 2 minutes, because just my body, I couldn't cope. It's so hard on the whole body. And I've never, ever in my entire life sweated as much as in Japan. It's like you arrive on the top of the mountain after like a long climb, and not only is your shirt completely soaked, but also your trousers, your pants.
Yep.
There's literally sweat running out of your pants. It's not you haven't peed in it; it's sweat.
Yes.
Your socks, my socks were soaking wet.
Everything soaks through completely.
So I was standing there, I was wringing out my shirt. There was like half a liter of sweat coming out of it. This is something I have never, ever experienced in any other country.
You have not hiked in the Philippines. The Philippines, I hiked extensively in the Philippines. It was more extreme, but the same idea. And as you're walking, the sweat flings from your elbows and from the tip of your little finger, because that's facing down. So it runs down your arms, and flings from those points. And so you have this these two little tracks of sweat along the ground.
So I was like, I was drinking all the time. And this is very good because there's lots of water sources in Japan. So that's not a big problem. But as much as I could drink, there was nothing coming out. There was nothing coming out again.
You're not peeing.
You're not peeing anymore. And I really, really got scared because I realized I also need minerals. Sweating. So not enough calories, not enough sugar. I was sweating out all the minerals. I didn't pee anymore. And I realized maybe I'm sort of even intellectually impaired because I don't get the energy, I don't get the minerals I need. So this was another reason why I decided to quit the first trail.
Well, the kombinis are well stocked with things to keep from running out of minerals. There are little tablets that melt in your mouth that many hikers carry and use. They're not simply salt tablets. They have the other, potassium and all that you need. And there are also energy drink type mixes that I think one is called, this is a very strange name, but Pocari Sweat, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean, who named it that? But there are several different drinks available that are well stocked in the convenies to replenish the fluids. But again, you need to know what you're looking at.
Right. So the third factor is just the most important, which is the steepness of terrain. So first of all, as you have mentioned, this is very, historically speaking, very, very new mountains. So they are still sort of moving, and it's not like in the Alps or in the Rocky Mountains where the ground is solid rock. What you're walking on is sort of like of volcanic origin, and you have a layer of earth.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of like a very loose layer of earth. So the problem is, as soon as it rains, everything is gone. Everything just washes out. And basically you could count on it. If you're contouring around a steep slope and you're coming to the area where it's normally like a little current, a little stream or whatever, because during rainy season, this little tiny trickle or stream will be a raging current.
And deep mud sometimes. Exactly. It can be very hard, incredibly hard going. You're sinking up to your knees constantly or further in the mud sometimes.
So basically, wherever the trail is passing these streams, the trail will be gone, completely gone. Sometimes it's easy to pass, but sometimes you're standing there and like, well, what am I doing now? So so I had to realize my normal daily average is like 30 to 35 kilometers, your typical 20 miles. So in Japan, just forget it. I was happy sometimes to be able to do 20 kilometers.
Yeah.
So I averaged like 20 to 25. And this was hard because I miscalculated the food, my rest days, everything went out of proportion because everything took forever.
Right.
Plus, keep in mind, the length of daylight is much, much shorter than in any other countries in summer. So you even in summer, depending where you are in Japan, but where I was hiking, it's 12 hours, more or less, give or take. So if you don't get your ass out of your tent at 5 o'clock in the morning, you just don't have the time because it gets sunrises between 5 and 6. But at 5, it's pitch dark.
That's the thing about Japan to realize is actually they have it arranged for cultural reasons that we don't need to get into, but they have it arranged so that essentially the sun goes down by 6 p.m. all year round.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what that means is that it rises earlier and earlier and earlier through the summer. So serious hikers in the mountains and Japanese hikers, it drives Westerners crazy, but they'll be up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning, rustling their bags, getting ready to go. And, Westerners are just sitting there holding their heads with, in pain, trying to figure out how to wake up at that hour. But this is what serious Japanese hikers do because that's when the daylight is and they want to finish a couple of hours before sundown.
Exactly. So these three factors of food, the climate, plus the steepness of the terrain, made me realize when you want to hike in Japan, you basically have to forget a lot of what works very well in other countries, but it will not work here.
Yeah.
So even for me, being an extremely experienced hiker, for me, this was a completely new situation. And it took me quite a while to adapt to it. In the end, to after all these horror stories I've told now, in the end, I absolutely loved it. The Michinoku Coastal Trail was one of the best trail experiences ever, but it was a trail that you cannot compare at all with other trails. And now when we switched to the Michinoku Coastal Trail, which I then switched on, I basically bailed from the Tokai Shizenhodo, took the Shinkansen up north and started a new trail.
Mm-hmm.
And although the same problems apply, the food is the same, the climate is the same, but and the terrain basically is also very steep. It's a bit easier because you're close to the sea, so you have a little bit of breeze. And plus the mountains are still very steep, but they are only 400 meters high. So it's not like you're not climbing up a mountain for 5 hours, or maybe just only 2 hours. So this helps a lot.
Yep.
Plus the Tokai Shizenholo is an old trail, and if they don't do maintenance, which it hasn't happened, it's completely eroded. Whereas the Michinoku Coastal Trail has just been officially opened in 2019. So erosion is not as bad yet as on the other trail. So it was considerably easier, especially since time has progressed, and I was now starting or hiking it in September. And from then on, it got easier. As you have mentioned, the best hiking season in Japan is either spring or fall. And I was now heading into fall. So this made things a lot easier.
Well, the best hiking season at those altitudes. Japan has wonderful alpine hiking, probably the best infrastructure for high altitude hiking of any country in the world. And I do both. Many people do one or the other. So, you're more oriented towards that lower altitude. And, that's where the long distance stuff usually is. Japan, actually, you can do long distance at high altitude, and that would be in July and August. So if one wants to hike in Japan, some of the best hiking is in the summer. And there are many people who refuse to bother with any other time of year, because in the summer you can go to high altitude, which is absolutely fabulous. And there are places to stay, and you can get food up there, so you don't have to carry it all. But it's only a 6-week season, really. Before we move on to the MCT, the Michinoku Coastal Trail, I wanted to say a couple of things about the Tokai Shizenhodo. So I had mentioned that there was that enormous typhoon, and I was living in the Tokyo area at the time. I went and tried to hike the Tokai Shizenhodo from that end after that, and ran into what you were talking about: closures, destruction, no apparent effort to repair the trail. I think that there are a number of factors going on here. Most trails are maintained in Japan by the government, either local or national. And the Tokai Shizenhodo is, I believe, maintained at the prefectural level, but I think some of the funding comes from the national level. And so the overall trail is a nationally sponsored trail, but each prefecture's segment is taken care of by that prefecture. And so there's enormous variance from prefecture to prefecture. And I think that most people acknowledge that Kyoto is probably the best maintained of the prefectures. And even in Kyoto, there was recent storm damage, because I did that entire section of the trail of the Tokai Shizenhodo. There is currently an organization that is doing a survey of the Tokai Shizenhodo. I only know them from Facebook, but there's a Trailblaze Hiking Institute, which I think is begun by one or more Japanese who have hiked long distance trails in the US. And they are doing right now a survey with teams in, I think, 4 different sections. They've divided the TSH into 4 different sections, and they're doing a survey of trail conditions. And it sounds like they have some sponsorship or relationship with the national government that oversees this overall trail. And so, and I saw that Kumi Aizawa, the head of the Michinoku Coastal Trail, has actually been communicating with them. So I have high hopes that more attention will come to bear on the Tokai Shizenhodo, and hopefully that would also bring with it more funding and more intention to get it repaired. But as you've said, the eastern sections of the Tokai Shizenhodo are currently a mess. I think that, and some places impassable. The place you talked about with the severe erosion on a very, very steep mountainside, and this is, one finds oneself often walking essentially along a cliffside on a narrow trail. And this is one of the most beautiful aspects I've done this in the European Alps, but one does it much more often in Japan, Taiwan also, where one is walking along a narrow trail on a very, very steep hillside, and one wouldn't be able to maneuver off the trail. And then, of course, erosion happens, and there are landslides. And so you were saying, well, of course I would have survived, but, I could have been hurt. But if you're hurt, as you said, you were not carrying any sort of satellite messaging, and you were alone, and no one else is going to come down the trail because they know that it's washed out. And so if you get injured, it's all over. You can die. And I mean, Japan has some of the best infrastructure and emergency services, and they will come in and get you if they know you're there and hurt. But in that kind of situation, you can easily end up not being able to tell anybody and not being able to get out yourself. So, hiking as a team, or having a satellite messenger, or being extremely prudent is the only way out. So, when one runs into a situation like that where you're on a very, very steep trail and you've got a landslide, you really need to turn around in Japan and not continue on, and go and take the bus around, which is what you ended up doing. So you made the right decision, in my opinion. And I'm glad that there is more attention coming to bear on the Tokai Shizenhodo, because I really think that it's one of the best exotic alternatives to the big three in the U.S., the long distance hiking trails. Essentially, it could be the Appalachian Trail of Japan.
Definitely.
And it's a real pity. There are other issues also, like the wild camping situation, which is not that bad, but the legalities, the Japanese haven't worked that out. So that would be very nice if there was a different sort of approach to that worked out among the Japanese, but that will take a few years. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I think let's now go to the Michinoku Coastal Trail, because this is like the positive example.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And one other big difference, I mean, the Michinoku Coastal Trail was built and I believe is largely maintained by volunteers. And therefore that issue of bringing government attention to the maintenance is not as big a one. Please correct me.
Yes, that's. But let's first start with let's introduce the Michinoku Coastal Trail.
Please go ahead.
So the trail is a little bit longer than 1,000 kilometers, 1,023 to be exact. So 1,000 kilometers, something like 600 miles. It runs from Hachinohe to Soma, which is like the northern part of Japanese main island Honshu, on the eastern coast there. And the area is called Tohoku. And to start first with Tohoku, nobody has probably heard about Tohoku, me neither. Only 2% of foreign tourists in Japan ever make it up to Tohoku. So you'll be the only foreigner there. There's not many tourists. It's really off the beaten path. But you haven't probably not heard of Tohoku, but I think everybody will have heard of Fukushima. So Tohoku is the area that got hit so hard in the 2011 tsunami. And this was also like the idea why to build a trail there. The idea had been before. There has been a Japanese local who always was begging the government, let's build a trail here, but they were not interested, or too much work, or God knows what. But then after the tsunami had hit, so many people become homeless. It was like economically, it was a big blow for this area, which, as far as I understood, has never been very rich. This is not like the industrial hothouse of Japan. This is basically really countryside, lots of fishing villages. So it has always been sort of a poor underdeveloped area. And then like when the tsunami hit, this was a big, big, big problem for them. So this is when the government said, okay, now is the time. We want to rebuild this area. So they built this trail in order to bring tourists there. So in the end, when I hiked this trail, I met Kumi Aisawa. She's running the NPO, the nonprofit organization behind the Michinoku Coastal Trail. So all the wisdom I'm now telling you is from her. And she said that for this trail, for the Michinoku Coastal Trail, no new trail has been built. It's all existing trails, or, which was very impressive, they had about 200 meetings in the communities along the trail, especially with older people, to find out, are there old pass roads? Are there old like connecting trails? So they used these trails. They had to do maintenance on them. They had to like recover them sort of, but they hardly built any new trails. The whole trail, as Tokashi Senhodo as well, is funded by the government, to be precise, from the Ministry of Environment. And so there is not many volunteers involved there. It's right. Government money, and they didn't build new trail.
Good.
So that's to start with. So if you look at the Michinoku Coastal Trail, this was my idea. I wanted to hike it in second place because it follows the coastline. And it follows the coastline through every damn peninsula that there is. And there is a lot of peninsulas. So every other day I had the choice. I can either follow the trail, which means I have to hike 30 kilometers around this peninsula, or I can take the shortcut, 500 meters or less than a kilometer. And with the shortcut, it saves me 30 kilometers or more. So every other day I had this choice. I hiked the whole trail. I hiked the whole damn thing, but you have a lot of like variations. Like if you're running out of time, you can do shortcuts every day. Plus, what makes this trail also very attractive is along the coast, there's always, always, always a train line. So it is very easy to have like sort of like you have a base in one town, cheap hotel, whatever. And then you take the train and hike a section, stay in this hotel, take the train next day, hike another section. So it makes it very, very easy. Like all the logistic is very easy because Japanese trains are always on time. And these local trains are also very cheap. So, they are not like very, very frequent, but it's really feasible to like for 2 or 3 days to have like this one hotel where you stay and hike from there. I didn't do that very much. I basically thru-hiked. I camped most of the time, but I stayed in more hotels than usual. So, 2 things that are very important about the Michinoku Coastal Trail, and both are very unusual, for any other trail I've hiked. First of all, the percentage of pavement on this trail, pavement versus nature trail, is shocking. It's really shocking, and it nearly put me off hiking the trail. The percentage of pavement is 75%. 75% is on pavement. But, and this is what I told Kumi Aisawa when we met, it's really putting you off. But in fact, you will spend more than half of your time on nature trail, which sounds first a bit weird, but the nature trail, again, is so steep, so complicated that whereas you have a normal hiking speed of 4 kilometers per hour on pavement, you'll have maybe 2 kilometers per hour on nature trail. So in the end, you spend more time on nature trail than on pavement. And trust me, after like spending a whole day on nature trail, you'll be very happy to see pavement again.
That's a fascinating point. I mean, it's absolutely, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that where you're used to doing 20 miles or 30 kilometers, 35 kilometers in other countries, you know, in less severe mountains and you know, now when you did the MCT, you were out of that horribly humid time of year. So that was, you know, not an issue then. But in Japan, when you're off of pavement, a better estimate is 12 to 15 miles a day, or what does it work out to 20 to 25 kilometers a day?
Yes. So, and also, like, if you look at the map, it's so tempting to shortcut the peninsulas, but these are actually the best hiking areas.
Don't miss them. Yes.
Don't miss them. And also, like, lots of trail that is categorized as pavement is actually not really pavement, because what has happened is, especially along these peninsulas, there have been old roads, very, very old roads, which now, especially after the tsunami, better roads and higher roads have been built. So the old roads are still there, but they are overgrown. You have a lot of like tree leaves, needles, whatever lying on the pavement. Most of them are not even passable anymore. So there's no traffic or hardly any traffic.
With a car.
With a car, yeah, exactly. It feels technically it's pavement, but it doesn't feel like it. So the percentage of real pavement as like roads is not so bad. Huh. And even if you have to hike on pavement, most of the time, 99% or 95% of the time, it's really very, very quiet country roads where you have maybe 2 cars per hour. No cars at night. I sometimes camp exactly at the roadside, but there's no car at night.
Right.
And there's only one section of trail, which is really dangerous because there is no shoulder. Right. And it's a very busy road. I talked to Kumi about it and said like, hey, you have to change that. But this is just one short stretch, maybe 10 kilometers out of like 1,000.
Right.
So don't be put off by the pavement, which was even for me, like very, very difficult to keep that out of my mind. So the second thing is, this is a trail with a purpose. And the purpose is to revitalize this area which has been destroyed by the tsunami. And you go through all these memorial places. And this is something, and I really have to dive into that because this is something you will not grasp as a foreigner. First of all, especially being from Germany, in Germany, hardly anybody knows about the tsunami. Everybody just connects this tsunami with Fukushima, with the disaster at the nuclear power plant. In Japanese eyes, the nuclear power plant is just sort of a sidekick of the tsunami. The tsunami is really the trauma, because in the tsunami, 20,000 people died, 20,000, and 250,000 became homeless. Whereas due to radioactivity from the nuclear power plant, 0 person died, 0, or I think there is 1 person maybe, but really 0.
Yeah, I think 1 worker. Yeah.
1 worker is like the official, but people had been evacuated. So really for the Japanese national soul, the problem was a tsunami, not the nuclear power plant. And tsunamis is nothing new in Japanese history. So there have been in the last century, there have been 3 big tsunamis, 1896, 1933, and the biggest one in 2011. So the trail brings you through a lot of places where you have old stone markers from old centuries saying, don't settle below this point, you'll die in the next tsunami. You still see the stone markers, but people became lazy and they settled there. So the basic idea of all these memorial places you pass and also of the trail is to make people aware there has been a tsunami, there will be another tsunami, and you can only take precautions if you are aware of the dangers. So every little tiny village, really every community there has a tsunami memorial park. Every place where you pass hundreds, in the end you get really tired because there is these tsunami memorials everywhere you go. And there are really impressive memorials like museums, buildings, all maintained with lots of money to make people aware of what has happened. So, and you really, really have to keep that in mind. This is a memorial trail for Japanese people, but also for foreign people. So if you just want to hike, if you just want nature, maybe this is not the ideal trail for you, although you have very, very scenic coastal landscape. But really the emphasis is on the tsunami. And for me, this was also emotionally one of the most demanding trails, because you pass through all these memorial places and you hear all the stories, you hear interviews, you see movies, you see films. And in the end, honestly, I couldn't camp at the beach anymore. Whenever I camped, I looked like, hey, is this high enough? Is this campsite higher than 30 meters? Because this is how far the tsunami reached.
Right.
You really get sort of also traumatized. So this for me, I give you really a very, very, very high recommendation. It was a fantastic trail, but keep in mind, high percentage of pavement, and you have to really deal with this tsunami. This is the idea of the trail, and be prepared. If you don't want to see that, go somewhere else. Plus, there's also like beautiful, beautiful coastal sceneries, one of the nicest coastal trails. But, and also this is, keep in mind, after the tsunami, they had to build dikes. So every little village has a gray concrete dike. So when I posted really a lot of pictures on social media, and for Germans, this was very confusing because they see all this concrete. They say, how can they do this to their beautiful coastline? And I just said, hey, if they don't do this, they'll all die. They have a beautiful coastline, but everybody will die in the next tsunami. So they have no choice. But you will see a lot of concrete. You will walk on a lot of dikes, because not only the coastline has been, there has been dikes, but also the rivers, because tsunamis go up the rivers. So there's lots of concrete. You'll walk on it, but it has a purpose.
Yes. So, go on. Sorry.
So having said that, if you're prepared to do that, I wanted to see the tsunami. I wanted to see all these memorials. It was really a memorable trail, one of my top 10 trails. It's very different from anything else I've done, but it's very, very well worth it. So the whole thing was just inaugurated, officially opened in 2019. Then Corona hit. So 2023, when I hiked this year, was just the first real thru-hiker season they've had. There is no thru-hiker tradition in Japan. So the only Japanese people I've met hiking, there was very few, was just three Japanese hikers and no foreign hikers. So the Japanese only do it in sections, which is easy because you have all these train connections, but there's no thru-hikers. There's no tradition. So even like businesses, hotels, they are not really used to seeing hikers.
Mm-hmm.
The waymarking is sort of okay, but you still need a GPS. You just, you can download the tracks. You cannot navigate by markers only, because the trail is only marked when it's nature trail, but it's rarely marked when it's on pavement or on concrete. So, what should we touch on?
Well, I mean, I have to, just a personal comment. I absolutely hate all of the cement along the rivers and the coastline in Japan. I think it's particularly sad in the rivers. And I question whether it's necessary to the degree that it's there. Some of it is, yes. But there are cultural factors that lead to it being there. The relationship between the government and the people is different. And this is part of that, I think. That said, the coastline of Japan is one of the most beautiful in the world. And you were saying, if you like nature, don't come on this trail, or don't come for that reason. Yeah.
Don't come for that reason.
And I haven't hiked the MCT, but I've spent a lot of time on the Japanese coast, and just based on that, I would disagree. I mean, the coast of Japan is fabulously beautiful, especially out on those peninsulas. And that's why you wouldn't want to miss those peninsulas. You want to walk around every single one and drink up that scenery, because that's what you're there for. It is spectacular walking along the coastline of Japan, even if one has to overlook some cement or a great deal of it. Alex Kerr, the most famous Western author in Japan, Kerr, wrote several well-known books about Japan, and actually no longer lives in Japan. He's in Thailand now. but he still spends a lot of time in Japan. And he gives several statistics that are very interesting. And one of them is that the Japanese cement industry is the largest one in the world. The Japanese cement industry is far larger than the cement industry in the United States. And if you consider the size of those two countries, the thought that so much more concrete is used in Japan than in the U.S. really gives you an idea of how much concrete you are talking about.
Well, maybe before we go more into like this tsunami stuff, one thing, this was the first question my German followers asked, and unfortunately this topic is not touched on the MCT website, which is radioactivity. Because especially for Germans or for Europeans, nobody knows about tsunami anymore. It's all about Fukushima. So everybody was making sure, how can you hike there? Can you eat the fish? Can you go into the ocean? And so on and so forth. And to give you just an example, the trail now finishes at Soma. Because this was when they conceived the idea of the trail, they said, okay, this is like out of the danger zone.
Yeah.
So now they have an extension. But I went to Fukushima. I went to the nuclear power plant memorial, which is just like 10 kilometers away from Fukushima or even less. And I went to the TEPCO Information Center, which is in Futaba, also 10 kilometers from the actual power plant. And if you go to Futaba, there is Geiger counters on the roads. And they show you how much is radioactivity now. It is measured in microsievert per hour. And I couldn't trust my eyes that in Germany, in the Black Forest in Germany, famous holiday region, radioactivity is double as high as in Futaba.
Wow.
10 kilometers away from the power plant, because Germany has a higher natural radioactivity.
Huh.
So don't be deterred. This is really not the problem. You can eat the fish. Of course, the radioactivity was high in 2011, but due to how the catastrophe there happened, it was much less. Only 10% of the radioactivity was expelled. Only 10% of the radioactivity escaped than in Chernobyl. And most of the radioactivity was a hydrogen cloud, which was actually driven out into the ocean. So the pollution, the contamination of the area around Fukushima is no comparison to what happened in Chernobyl. You cannot compare these two disasters. They were both very, very bad, but the Japanese were just much more lucky. So right now, which was also, I couldn't believe it when I went to TEPCO Information Center. Really, hundreds and thousands of workers now work in Fukushima at the nuclear power plant without any specific clothing. They just wear normal work clothes because the level of radioactivity is normal. So don't be put off. There's lots of problems with hiking Japanese trails, but radioactivity is not a problem on the Michinoku Coastal Trail.
This is a great point, and overcoming the prejudices and discrimination because of the radiation issues has been a huge issue. And I mean, Japan is well known for being one of the most first world of nations in the world. As I was saying earlier, I mean, your access to emergency services and such, if something goes wrong on the trail, if you can communicate, is second to none. It's terrific. They will come and rescue you, and you'll get good care, and they'll take you to a good hospital. Likewise, monitoring in the time since the disaster, the Fukushima disaster has been excellent and, publicized and they will give you the numbers and they were very careful to shut off the fields where there had been contamination, where you can't grow food anymore, where you won't be able to for a long time. But in terms of the water flows through. So the fisheries and such certainly were a concern, but and releasing some of the wastewater has been a concern lately, especially among other Asian nations. That's been a big problem. But the Japanese are on top of the numbers and are being public with those numbers and transparent about the situation. And yeah, you can count on being in that area and being safe in terms of radiation.
So that was, and it was strange. I asked Kumi Aisawa, who's running this organization behind the Michinoku Coastal Trail, why are you not mentioning this on your website? And she said, because, well, we didn't even think of it because all Japanese people know. And for sure, like, they know all the efforts that have been done, like the topsoil has been carried away, has been taken away. So, but as a foreigner, you only have these pictures of Fukushima. So this is really not a problem. And the trail is actually, this is, the government's, idea of like, how can we rebuild this area? How can we bring tourists back? So this is, the idea behind the trail.
Yeah.
So, and we were talking about fishing. This is also one of the fantastic advantages on this trail. You pass all these little fishing villages.
Yeah.
And I've been eating fresh fish. Right now I've been eating raw fish for breakfast without blinking an eye, which is strange for Germans, but everyone's like, can you really eat this? But wow. Yeah. All this fresh fish. It's amazing. Really, Michinoku Coastal Trail is also some sort of a gourmet tour, because what happens is like you will encounter lots of like what I would call spa hotels. They are not as posh as these hotels like in the US or in Europe would be, but it's hotels located on the coast. They have a private onsen. They have a thermal bath. So, which is a very big issue in Japan.
Yes, go ahead and talk about onsen a bit so that people get your impression of it.
Well, I just love onsen. Onsen is like one of the things that the onsen and the food is the thing that will bring me back to Japan very quickly. Onsen, there's onsen and sento. Both are public baths. Onsen is a thermal bath, which is natural heated water from the ground. Sento is just water from the tap, which is heated for like like a swimming pool.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's the same system. All these baths, all these onsen and sento, they are sort of double because there's one bath for women and one bath for men. When you go there, you enter, you get completely undressed, naked. You go into the onsen, you wash yourself, and thoroughly. Like if you watch Japanese people, it takes them 15 to 30 minutes to get so clean so they can actually enter the hot water. You're naked all the time. And it's so relaxing, especially after a day of walking. First of all, you get completely clean. Onsen provides shampoo, conditioner, body soap. So you get clean. Then you relax in this hot water, and it's absolutely fantastic. This is like hiking doesn't get any better.
Yeah, the towel, all the soap, the razor for, all of that is provided. You just walk in and get clean and shaved and all the rest.
Exactly. So these spa hotels have an onsen, and they usually also have a restaurant. So right now, with the yen being so weak, this is an incredibly cheap experience.
Yes.
I mean, the prices are just ridiculous.
Amazing. Yes.
For a spa hotel, like, you get a room, you get your free entrance to the spa as long as you want. And they are usually open, either 24 hours or early morning and till late at night, plus breakfast, plus dinner. And I talk about this dinner later. You pay something like 50 euros. This is so ridiculous. In Germany, you don't even get accommodation for 50 euros, not to mention like a 5-star dinner. And now we can talk about the food, because this is on the coastline. All these spa hotels, or all the hotels, usually have also offer food. If you stay at a private place, like sort of like bed and breakfast or something, they also offer food. Then the lady of the house cooks it, and it's breathtaking. It's just fantastic. So you get it doesn't only taste good, it looks good, because Japanese are masters in decoration. So you get like 50 little tiny plates, bowls, God knows what, with marinated seaweed, raw fish, grilled fish. One place, like I was sitting and they had these big what's the name for this St. Jacob's
Sorry?
What is this with the big shells, which is like the symbol for pilgrims? What is the name for it in English? The shell, St. Jacob shell.
I'm not sure. Yeah, sorry.
So you have the shell, and you have a little grill on your table, and you grill the fish in its own shell. It just blew my mind.
Yeah, and there's a pattern of, I think, I'm not sure in what context this happens, but often the meals you have to have the fish cooked like several different ways. So you'll have it fried or grilled, and then raw, and then baked, and boiled, and all the different ways that one could cook it, different kinds of fish. Anyway, go on. I'm sorry.
So this is really it's a gourmet tour. It's a spa tour. Plus the trail crosses several islands, especially the Urato Islands. So they even installed a hiker ferry. You have to book 5 days in advance, but you can also use the city ferry. Everything very, very cheap. So ferry rides are really, really very affordable. So you get to these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful islands. So it can be a very relaxing tour. You see a Japan that normal tourists don't get. The normal tourists go to Tokyo, they go to Osaka, maybe to Kyoto, but they don't go to the coast side.
And that's one of the biggest things, is getting off the beaten trail in Japan is a very special thing. It's not like Tokyo. It's not even like Kyoto. And this is, the Tokai Shizen Hodo will do this for you, but the Michinoku Coastal Trail would do it much more. Tohoku is, in the kanji in Japanese just means northeast. But it is, most countries have something like this, with the region that has always been poor, and where it's just a little far away. Real estate values are lower, but the jobs are very few, and conditions are rough. And Tohoku was that, and the tsunami was of course a disaster, but multiplied in its effect because of that. I just want to say, in terms of exchange rate against the dollar right now, as you said earlier, it's a historic low. It's about 150 yen for $1. Okay. And of course the euro is traditionally a little higher. So it's just an extraordinary exchange rate. Yeah. Traditionally one thinks of the exchange as being about 100, a yen equals 1 cent. So 100 yen equals $1. I've seen it as low as 83 in the last 20 years. And so this is almost twice that in terms of the ratio. So one can assume that it might go back in the future. But still, something you were talking about early on in terms of how the very high price of buying nuts or some of the hiking foods that you're used to, chocolate or whatever, an axiom to always sort of go back to in Japan is that if you're buying things that are local, then the cost is often quite reasonable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If you're buying something that's not necessarily imported, but seen as foreign, that is not something that Japanese kind of consume in their normal day-to-day life, then the price will be much higher. And so, if one stays in the normal accommodations rather than a fancier Western style hotel, the quality is probably going to be a much better deal for the price. And there are another thing is that you were just, we had an interruption in our recording. So that this is, we're a little bit of review right now, coming back. So in terms of lodging costs, in Japan, you were mentioning that they have the bath and they have the meals. They have a restaurant in the lodging. And when Westerners look at Japanese hotel prices or lodging prices, in normal times, when the exchange rate is more normal, they often think that the prices seem very high. And that they're per person. Well, the reason that they're per person is that you're not paying so much for the lodging or even the bath. You're paying for the meals.
Exactly.
Yeah, because the meals are always included. And so, it's not such a bad deal when it's certainly right now with the exchange rate, but even in normal times, it's not such a bad deal when you consider that it's an all-in price. Everything is included for that, even your shampoo. So, you do pay per person, but that's all you're going to have to pay that evening. You're done. And, there are different kinds of accommodations. There are, you mentioned staying in business hotels sometimes. You can stay in ryokan, which are more fancy and traditional and usually have an onsen bath, like you were talking about, geothermal hot spring. Sometimes you would stay in a minchiku, which you were talking about is a little more of a sort of homestay situation. It's more run out of a home. They provide lodging. The food might still be very nice. The bath won't be as fancy. You could even be in their own bath in the home, or that you might go out to the sento, which is the public bath nearby.
But let me just interrupt you. This is one of the problems of the Michinoku Coastal Trail, that although the idea is to rebuild industry, to bring money to this underdeveloped region,
right,
the trail organization has really not provided for foreigners to book these places, to book these hotels.
Right.
So as a foreigner, you are stuck to booking business hotels or places that can be booked through booking platforms like Booking.com, Agoda, Japanican. And these Michinoku, these private places, is almost impossible because they have on their website, it says you can translate them, but it says you can only book through telephone calls, and it's just not possible. So this is really one of the biggest problems. I mean, I don't speak any Japanese.
Right.
I still cope because if you look at all these booking platforms, some bigger hotels have a booking website on their own homepage, and you can use Google Translate. So it works. But these little private places, Michinoku, is out of question for foreigners. Only if you go to tourist information centers and they can book it for you.
Right.
Otherwise, this is really a problem I hope the trail organization is working on.
Uh-huh.
So, but still the cost is very reasonable because the alternative is just camping, and wild camping is so easy in Japan. Very, very easy. I was very worried about that because the terrain is very steep. I don't want to be discovered. I want to be discreet. But first of all, as soon as night falls, nobody's out there. Really, I camped several times directly on the trail, no problem. Also, there's lots of pavilions, rest areas, benches, so you can camp there because at night there's nobody there. Just keep in mind, and even closer to villages, no problem because nobody goes out of their houses. Most of the population is quite old anyway, so they're not going out even on a weekend to party. So as soon as it's dark, you have peace and quiet. Just keep in mind, there's lots of bears. You will see bears warning signs. I don't think they are a big problem because, you're not talking grizzly bears. But if you stumble across a bear, like if you surprise a bear, it might be a problem. So just keep in mind there are a lot of bears. I saw lots of bear excrements, bear signs. Yeah. So I didn't take it that seriously, but there have been more and more attacks on humans. But basically, this is like humans surprising the bears. But other than that, I felt very comfortable with wild camping because there's always somewhere again, the terrain is very steep, but there's always some flat area that has been used for storing wood or for fields or for whatever. So this was really, really very, very easy. So it really depends on you how much money you want to spend. Food with the yen exchange rate now, food is relatively cheap. You can buy like soba, your typical noodle soup. You can buy meals less than $10. No problem.
Yes. Yeah.
And very, very, very good food.
We're talking $3, $6.
So
you can get a nice meal often for $6 or $7.
Exactly. And it's great food. So, as soon as I saw a restaurant, I made a beeline for it because why should I eat these dehydrated ramen soup and God knows what from a store? So, if there's a restaurant, I ate there and just took like these ramen soup or like hard-boiled eggs, stuff like that, to my campsite. But because you're relatively close to civilization, this is, you have a lot of restaurants and resupply is not a problem. So I just want to touch on what you're going to see, regarding the tsunami, because this is the main topic of the trail. So, the tsunami damage gets worse and worse the further south you get. So in the north, when you started Hachinohe, this was not hit hard during the tsunami. All the memorials and all this starts only the further south you go. So what you will see is each village has a tsunami memorial park, tsunami markers. So you see all these stone markers. And further south, you will have lots of places or buildings that have been destroyed by the tsunami, but have been left there as a memorial. So these buildings are mostly schools, old elementary schools, which have been also functioning as evacuation sites. So here you can see the damage done by the tsunami, and usually they have documentaries, they have footage of the tsunami and interviews with people who survived. So this, I promise you, when you leave these places, you won't feel very happy. So this is like really a strange trail. It's, you leave these places and you can't get these thoughts out of your mind. I don't think this is a bad thing. It's just like, be prepared for that. This is emotionally hardcore. You see buildings, like I remember like one site where there has been a recreational building there. And people, when the tsunami hit, they fled up on top and they had to cling to the antenna in order to be not washed away.
Yeah.
And you see like interviews with survivors. And this one survivor said, I stuck there and the waves hit and it was so cold. I mean, the tsunami hit early March and it was snowing at night. And he said it would have been so easy to let go of the antenna and just die. It was so hard. It was cold. We were freezing and I just wanted to die. And I had to force myself to look at the photo of my kids, of my wife, in order not to let go and to stay there. And you see this and it's so intense and you leave these places and it's just very difficult. What is interesting also is what is very difficult in Japanese culture comparing it to American or to European culture is, first of all, everybody apologizes. When you go to the TEPCO Information Center, the first thing is they said, we apologize to the Japanese people for all the grief, for all the damage we have caused. Our sense of security was based on arrogance and false optimism. So and you see that everywhere, everybody apologizes for what they have done or what they have not done. And they built these memorial places, really like they are driven by the spirit. We want to prevent this catastrophe to happen again. So
was it TEPCO who built the memorials?
No, the TEPCO built, there's one information center for Fukushima, for the nuclear power plant.
And just for listeners to understand, TEPCO is Tokyo Electric Power Company. So they are the company that owns the Fukushima power plant. So
exactly, the nuclear power company.
That's what we're saying. Sorry. Go ahead.
So everything is about, hey, we want to learn. And one last thing that really was emotionally very hard was a place called Onagawa, where you can visit the old elementary school. And the problem is Onagawa is 3.5 kilometers away from the coastline, but it's alongside a river.
Right.
So there have been warnings. They were shaken by the earthquake, which preceded the tsunami.
Right.
And the teachers call all the students together. And some students, we are talking like elementary school students, they started running up the hill. So naturally, they ran up. And the teachers called them back for roll calls.
Right. Right.
And there were also like kids who have been collected by their parents, and the teachers persuaded the parents to stay with them. It's safer to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
So when the tsunami was already coming, just 1 minute before they started evacuating, and unfortunately not up the hill, they evacuated to some traffic island.
Right.
And everybody, parents, teachers, kids, everybody died.
Right.
And it became a big issue in Japan because they sued the school, the parents of the dead kids sued the school because there had not been an emergency plan. It would have been so easy. Just running up the hill would have saved everyone.
Yeah.
But haven't been the protocol. They didn't know what to do. So, but they portray all this. They say all this very openly. This was our fault. This was our mistake. Which would be unthinkable in most European places or in the US, because everybody is just, we are not responsible. Everybody tries just to cover their ass. And here in Japan, it's very different. Everybody says, we made a mistake, but we want to learn from that. And this gave me a lot of hope, because like the Japanese really learned, and this is why they have all these memorial places. Just expect it to be a very emotionally tough hike.
Yeah. And this is actually, when one reads news in Japan, this is one of the surprising things, is the level of candor. And Japanese news is really pretty even-handed and presents things in a very nonpartisan way. It's very factual, very factual. There's less opinion mixed in than there is in Western news sources. So that was a real, and it's not censored. There is not news censorship. There is some, of course, I mean, news organizations are generally private companies, and so they're sensitive to the sensitivities of their listeners or readers, but they, it is very factual, and there is not news censorship per se. The government is not holding anything back.
Mm. And really, I never grew tired of visiting these places, because strangely enough, although we all start with on March 11th at 2:46, an earthquake, the hardest, the strongest earthquake ever recorded in Japanese history, hit blah blah. It's all started like that, but every memorial place has a different focus.
Right.
Sometimes it's on like, how can we prevent that? What did we learn? How was the crisis managed? They even built like the war room or the crisis room of the government, like where all these decisions were made. Some focus on the logistics. Some focus on interviews with survivors. So every memorial is different. And from every, you learn more and more and more. I never grew tired of that. Mm. And I've never seen really, makes it so special. If you decide to hike the Michinoku Coastal Trail, yes, you have to deal with a lot of pavement, with a lot of concrete, with a lot of cement.
Yeah.
But what do you get in exchange? You get like, if you want, you get a fantastic landscape, really wonderful coastal landscape. You get fantastic food. You get all the onsen. Plus, and this is really, no other trail is like that. The topic is the tsunami. You will learn everything about that. And a last thing, I talked to Kumi Aisawa, who runs the organization behind it. And she studied architecture. She worked as an architect. And I asked her, like, why are you working here now? This is really strange for someone with your career. And she said, well, what do architects do? They want to make life easier for people to live in the houses they design. And what I try to do with the Michinoku Coastal Trail, I want to make life easier for the people there. I want to bring tourists there. I want to keep the memory alive.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what makes this trail so impressive, because the people behind it are driven by this idea. Hey, there has been a catastrophe, but life goes not only on, but we can learn from it. We want to improve.
Yeah.
This is not going to happen again, not in this way.
Not this way, yeah.
And so this makes this trail so special, and I highly, highly recommend it. Just don't think of it as your normal hiking trail. If you just want to hike, if you want to have beautiful scenery, there are better trails in Japan, other trails or other countries. But if this is attractive for you, then there's no other trail than the Michinoku Coastal Trail where you can experience that.
And the food and the baths are wonderful.
Of course.
So, where can people learn about this trail? If someone's interested in doing it, I think that the transportation is clear. You take the train. You fly into Japan, you take the train to one end, you start hiking, and you try to line up as much lodging as you can, realistically ahead of time, but there are always limitations to that. But where do people find out about how to do the trail and get information on it?
Okay, there is one guy, his name is Robin Lewis, and he's actually half Japanese, half British, I think. So he came to Japan. He was, I think, born in Great Britain. I'm not quite sure, but he came back to Japan. He speaks fluent Japanese. He hiked the trail, and he has a fantastic website. It's called michinokucoastaltrail.com. Okay. And on this website, you will find a Google map he has created. And this Google map you can access for free. It doesn't only show the trail, but also waypoints for every hotel, every convenience store, every shop, really everything you need to know. Mm-hmm. And with this website, you have all the information you need. These waypoints also have opening times of the supermarkets. They have telephone numbers, websites for the hotels. So there's really everything there. He also explains how do you book the ferries for the islands and lots of other useful tips. So right. This is the best, michinokucoastaltrail.com. This is the first stop you should do.
Right.
And also, if you want a first-hand report, I post it daily on Facebook and on Instagram. So you can go to my Instagram story highlights. Mm-hmm. And I post it really have 24 stories per day. So you can really get a very, very detailed description to see. You can see pictures. You can see the food
with photos,
content, and lots of stuff. But first, this is more to see what it is like, but the information is all on michinokucoastaltrail.com.
Okay. There's the organization that's Kumi's organization, or Aizawa-san. Her organization is not, it doesn't have a website that one would prefer.
No, there is, if you just Google Michinoku Coastal Trail, there is a government website, but it hardly has any information.
Okay.
And plus, there is the Michinoku Coastal Trail Club.
Right.
They have also some information. Something that is actually not such a good idea is you can buy maps of the Michinoku Coastal Trail, but you can either order them, but who orders maps from Japan if you live in Germany? So this is
right.
Yes. Or you can buy them in tourist information centers there in Japan.
Right.
This is a bit sad. So there's nothing you can download, except for the Google Maps.
Right.
On michinokucoastaltrail.com website. This is actually the best thing you can do.
Or is it not KML, GPX, a GPX track?
Yes, you can get the GPX track from michinokucoastaltrail.com from the website. You can download that. And there's also they call it model courses, because there's lots of foreigners who come and say, hey, we just want to hike 2 or 3 days.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So they offer that. Yes. And there's more and more agencies saying, hey, you can book everything through us. We book the hotel, you book accommodation, and you can just hike that. I don't think this is necessary.
Right.
You can hike on your own, but if you want to use that, there's
it's
also
available.
Agency. It's available.
Mm-hmm.
But keep in mind, there's hardly any hikers. I met 3 other thru-hikers who did it in sections. no other foreigner. But there's also a Michinoku Coastal Trail Facebook group. This is also a help. You can post your questions there. And Robin Lewis, who runs this website, is also posting there. So you will also get advice from other hikers there. So the Facebook group is called just Michinoku Coastal Trail.
Right. Thank you very much. How do listeners find out more about your adventures?
Yeah, this is quite easy. Just my name, Christine Thuermer. Thuermer is Thuermer. And just put it into Facebook, where I'm posting daily, 6 o'clock in the morning, German time, or on Instagram, where I'm posting continuously. And I'm also keeping the stories in the story highlights. So you can see all my Japanese trip. There's literally 1,000 pictures of my Japanese trip. So you can really get a good view, like what it is like to hike there. In all brutal detail, you can see leeches like sucking blood of my legs. You can see me sweating. You can see me wringing out my shirt. So it's not like this typical influencer stuff where I only show the nice sides, but where I also show, hey, I underestimated the challenges of Japan, and I was really suffering a lot in the beginning, but you can also see how much I enjoyed the trail in the end.
Yeah. And website, books you've written?
Yes, I have written 4 best-selling books. So if you go to Amazon and put in my name, Christine Thuermer, you will see that. But they are unfortunately not in English, only in German, Russian, Korean, and Czech for whatever reason. So.
All right. And you have a website, or
yes.
do you mostly have the social media?
Yes, I have a website, christinethurmer.de for Germany. For all the German-speaking listeners, I am also touring in German-speaking countries with my shows. I do shows about or presentations about hiking. Very, very funny, very entertaining. And I think in my next show, Japan will have lots of space. I will talk a lot about Japan because I had so many adventures there.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. This was wonderful to hear about from you, and we look forward to hearing what adventures you have in the future.
There will be a lot of adventures. I can promise you that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Trails Around the World podcast. Please visit us online at trailsaroundtheworld.com, and please join our Facebook group under the same name. If you liked this podcast, please help us out by leaving a review on your favorite podcast source. This is Sky King, and I look forward to you joining us next time. In the meantime, happy trails to you, and please remember to leave no trace as you enjoy the outdoors.